It was a Saturday evening. The Langford family reunion. A tradition, my father called it, though it always felt more like an annual interrogation with wine. I hadn't wanted to go. Not this year. Not after the job interview I didn't get, or the apartment ceiling that had caved in after a rainstorm. But when my mom called and said, "It's important to your father," I gave in, like I always did. The house was packed. Cousins, uncles, their new wives, their perfect children. The air was a mix of beef, red wine, and old resentments. My brothers, Mason and Eric, had already taken over the living room. Mason showing off photos from his latest international conference. Eric talking about his investment property portfolio like he was 25 and retired. I stood in the hallway for a full 2 minutes before stepping in. I wasn't even late. I was just trying to find a version of myself that wouldn't get picked apart the second I entered. My mother spotted me first. Her eyes scanned my outfit. Black jeans, navy blouse, hair pinned back. And I saw the corners of her mouth tighten, like she was swallowing her disappointment with a sip of her wine. "You could have dressed up a little," she said as she leaned in for a kiss. I forced a smile. "Nice to see you too, Mom." I found a quiet seat at the far end of the dining table, next to Grandpa. He gave my hand a quick squeeze, his fingers warm and a little shaky. He'd always been softer with me than the others, more observant. Dinner started harmless enough, polite conversation. "How's the weather in Chicago? Did you catch the game last week?" But the cracks began to show the moment Dad raised his glass. "To family," he said, standing tall, his voice booming with the self-importance of someone who'd never once had to question his own place at the head of the table. "To strong men who carry our legacy forward, Mason with his medical breakthroughs, Eric with his real estate empire." His eyes landed on me. The last one, the afterthought. "And Melissa," he added, voice tightening. "Still trying to figure things out, I suppose." There it was. The jab wrapped in politeness. The silence around the table was instant. No one looked up. No one said a word. It was the kind of silence that makes you feel like you're shrinking by the second. I took a sip of water. My hand didn't shake, but my chest felt like it was caving in. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but my mother beat me to it. "If only we had 2 sons instead of you," she said casually, almost like a joke. "Can you imagine how much simpler life would have been?" And she laughed. Laughed. As if those words hadn't sliced right through me in front of 12 people. I couldn't breathe. I looked around for someone, anyone, to speak up, to say it wasn't okay. But no one moved. No one even looked surprised. That's when Grandpa's hand slammed down on the table. Hard. Everyone jumped. "Enough," he said, voice gravelly and sharp. "It is time I reveal the truth." Every head turned. Even my father looked stunned. The room, which just seconds ago had been full of passive smirks and clinking glasses, fell into an eerie, suspended quiet. The kind that precedes something irreversible. My heart was pounding. Grandpa stood up slowly. His hands were trembling now, but his voice? Steady. Steel wrapped in velvet. "There are things this family has buried for too long," he said, eyes fixed on my parents. "But I won't let you shame Melissa another second. Not when you've been hiding the truth about her since the day she was born." The words dropped like bricks. My mother's face went pale. My father didn't blink. And I just stared at Grandpa, mouth dry, hands clenched, wondering what he meant. Wondering what truth he was about to dig up in front of everyone. But whatever it was, I knew, deep down, nothing would be the same after he said it. Not for me, not for them, and not for the Langford name. You know that feeling when time doesn't just slow down? It splits? That's what it felt like when my grandfather said those words. "You've been hiding the truth about her since the day she was born." Nobody moved. Even the children, normally shielded from adult tension with iPads and dessert, were quiet, picking up on the electricity in the air. My mother looked like she'd seen a ghost. My father's face was locked in stone. "What are you talking about, Dad?" My father said finally, his tone controlled but tight. The kind of tight that covers fear. Grandpa didn't sit back down. He stood straighter, the years seeming to fall away from his frame as something fierce took over. "I mean exactly what I said," he replied. "You've spent Melissa's entire life diminishing her. Not because she failed you, but because you failed her." My breath caught in my throat. I glanced across the table. Mason had leaned back, arms folded, jaw tense. Eric blinked rapidly, like his brain was rebooting. No one spoke. "I've kept my mouth shut for too long," Grandpa continued. "Out of loyalty. Out of some foolish idea that protecting this family meant keeping your secrets. But watching you humiliate her, again, in front of everyone? Not tonight." I opened my mouth to say something, to stop him, not to protect them, but because I suddenly didn't feel ready to know what was coming. But he kept going. "Melissa," he said, turning to me, "you were never the mistake. You were the only honest thing this family ever produced." The room tilted slightly. I gripped the edge of the table. "What are you even saying?" My mother snapped, her voice breaking. "You're confusing everyone." "No," Grandpa said firmly. "You're just scared the truth is finally crawling out from under the rug." He pulled something from the inside pocket of his coat, a folded envelope, yellowed at the edges, sealed with a wax stamp. The room held its breath. He placed it in front of me. "This is yours," he said. "And you should have had it years ago." My fingers hovered above it. "What is it?" I whispered. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at my parents with an expression I'd never seen before. Disappointment laced with grief. 28 years ago, he said, "your mother got pregnant. It wasn't planned, and it wasn't convenient." My mother's eyes filled with tears. She shook her head slowly. "Don't," she whispered. But he did. "They considered giving you up," he said, his voice cracking for the first time. "Because they wanted sons. Because daughters weren't part of the plan. Especially not one who would disrupt the picture they were painting of their perfect life." I couldn't breathe. "They told the family you were an accident," Grandpa continued. "But what they never told you is that for the first few weeks after you were born, they left you at my house." I blinked. "What?" "You stayed with your grandmother and me," he said. "Your mother needed time to recover," she said. But the truth was, they were deciding whether or not to keep you at all. I felt the floor drop out from under me. "No," I whispered. "No, that's not." "It's true," he said softly. "I held you every night, fed you, sang to you. And when they finally took you home, I made your father promise me that he'd never treat you differently." He looked at me then, not as a grandfather, but as someone who'd been carrying a secret so heavy it had aged him. "He broke that promise," he said, over and over again. I stared at the envelope. My hands were trembling now. "What's in here?" I asked. "Letters," he said. "From your grandmother, from me. We wrote to you in those early weeks thinking that maybe someday you'd need to know where you truly belonged." I couldn't open it. Not yet. "I'm sorry I waited so long," Grandpa said. I thought maybe things would change, that they'd grow, but they didn't. And now you're grown, and it's time you knew." My father stood up abruptly. "That's enough," he snapped. "This is our family, Dad, not yours to meddle with." Grandpa turned to him slowly. "No, Daniel," he said, steel in his voice. "You gave up the right to define this family the day you made your daughter feel like an outsider in her own home." The silence that followed was like ice water. I picked up the envelope with both hands. And for the first time in my life, I realized I was holding not just paper, but proof. That I wasn't imagining the difference. That I hadn't invented the distance. That what I felt growing up, the being left out, the coldness, the conditional love, wasn't a misunderstanding. It was real. And I wasn't crazy. I was just unwanted. At least by them. Not by everyone. Not by him. That night, I didn't go back to my apartment. I couldn't. I drove for nearly 2 hours past the edge of the city, the highway lit only by intermittent street lamps and the glow of my dashboard. I wasn't running away. I just needed silence. A space big enough to hold the noise in my head. In the passenger seat, the envelope sat unopened. I'd clutched it like a lifeline as I left the dinner table, barely hearing the voices calling my name. My mother had tried to follow me out. My father didn't even stand. And Grandpa. He just watched me leave, eyes glassy but proud. When I finally pulled into a rest stop near a lake we used to visit when I was little, the sky was already fading into midnight blue. I turned off the engine, cracked the window, and sat there. Headlights off, hands in my lap, heart pounding like it didn't know what to do now that the performance was over. Because that's what it had been, hadn't it? A performance. 28 years of playing the role of the quiet one, the sensitive one, the one who never measured up. All for a family that had decided who I was before I could speak my first word. I finally opened the envelope. The wax seal cracked easily, like it had been waiting for me all this time. Inside were 4 handwritten letters. The ink had faded slightly, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Delicate looping script from Grandma, and bold, blocky lines from Grandpa. The first one was dated just 6 days after I was born. Dear Melissa, we don't know where life will take you, or if these words will ever reach your hands. But we wanted you to have something that belongs only to you. The truth. My breath hitched. Right now you're asleep in the guest room crib. You have the tiniest hands I've ever seen, and you make these little sighing noises when you dream. Your mother says she's not ready. Your father says girls are a complication. But you, my dear, are pure light. I stopped reading, closed my eyes, tried to keep the sob from clawing up my throat. Because there it was. The confirmation I didn't know I needed. The truth that shattered the lie I had wrapped myself in for years. Maybe if I just try harder, they'll see me. They had seen me. And they had decided I wasn't worth keeping. I read the rest of the letters slowly, carefully, like they were relics from another world. And maybe they were. My grandmother wrote about the first time I smiled. Grandpa described taking me on long walks in the park, humming old Sinatra tunes while I stared at the trees. You looked at the world like it surprised you, he wrote once. Like everything might still turn out okay. I cried then. Not pretty, cinematic tears, but the kind that come from your ribs. The kind you can't control. The kind that taste like release. It was past 2 a.m. when I finally folded the letters and placed them gently back inside the envelope. I rested it on the dashboard and stared out at the lake, remembering a trip here when I was 9. The one time I recalled my father letting me skip stones beside him. He hadn't smiled. He hadn't even looked at me. But I'd cherished that silence like it was a gift. Now I understood why. I had been starving for crumbs of affection because I hadn't known I deserved more. That night by the lake, something shifted. Not everything. Not yet. But enough. Enough to stop carrying the lie that I had been the disappointment. Enough to stop asking what I'd done wrong. Because the truth was, I'd done nothing wrong. I had just been born inconvenient. And instead of choosing me, they had tried to mold me into someone easier to love. But I wasn't here to make them comfortable anymore. The next morning, I woke up with a clear decision in my chest. I was going to talk to Grandpa. Not just to thank him, but to ask him the question that had been gnawing at me ever since he placed that envelope on the table. Why now? Why, after nearly 3 decades of silence, did he decide to speak? And what else was still buried beneath the polished floors of our picture-perfect family? I didn't know what answers I'd get. But I was finally ready to ask. I visited Grandpa the next day. He lived in the same brick house he'd had since before I was born. a one-story with a wraparound porch, white shutters, and rose bushes he still trimmed by hand. It smelled like lemon balm and old paper inside. Familiar. A little too quiet. He was in the kitchen when I arrived, pouring tea into two mismatched mugs. One said world's okayest golfer. The other was plain white, chipped on the rim. "You came," he said simply. I nodded. "I have questions." "I figured." We sat in the living room. The clock ticked on the mantel. A framed photo of me from middle school sat beside it. Braces, messy braid, oversized hoodie. I remember that day. I'd just won the regional science fair. My parents hadn't come. Grandpa had taken the photo. "I read the letters," I said, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. He didn't say anything at first. Just nodded, like he already knew that part would be hard. Then I asked him what had kept me up all night. "Why now?" He looked at me, not past me, not through me, but at me. Like I mattered, like he was weighing the answer carefully, not because he was hiding anything, but because he didn't want to say the wrong thing. "I waited too long," he said finally. And I knew it. But I kept hoping, praying, maybe that your parents would change, that time would soften them. A beat passed. I wanted to believe they'd wake up one day and see what I saw. His eyes misted then, but he blinked it back. And I stayed quiet because I thought I was doing the right thing, letting them be parents, not interfering. But they weren't, I said, my voice tighter than I intended. They weren't parents, not to me. He exhaled slowly. "I know, and I'm sorry." He set his tea down and reached into the side table drawer, pulled out another envelope. This one was thinner, newer. "What's this?" I asked. "A letter I wrote a few months ago," he said. "I was planning to give it to you on your birthday, but after what happened at dinner, I hesitated, then opened it." His handwriting was familiar now. Sharp, precise, confident. "Dear Melissa, if I could go back, I'd do everything differently. I would have told you the truth when you were old enough to ask why things felt off. I would have made sure you never blamed yourself for the way they treated you. But mostly, I would have told you more often what I thought every time I saw you. You were never the failure. You were the proof that this family could have been better. You still are." I couldn't speak. My throat closed around something soft and painful. "I should have fought harder for you," he said, "instead of just loving you in the quiet." I looked at him then, really looked, at the wrinkles around his eyes, at the guilt he was still trying to carry for a choice that wasn't his. "You were the only one who ever tried," I said. That truth landed heavy between us. I took a breath. They said, at the table, that they wished they'd had two sons instead of me. His jaw clenched. "I heard." "They meant it." "I know." And then softly, almost like a confession, I said, "I think part of me still wants them to take it back." Grandpa didn't respond right away. He reached over, placed his hand gently on mine. "Wanting them to be better isn't the same as needing them to be," he said. "You've survived without their approval for 28 years. You don't need it now." I nodded, but something inside me still ached. "What do I do now?" I asked. He gave a small, sad smile. "You keep living. You build the life they never imagined you could. And when they finally look up and realize what they lost." "I don't rub it in?" "No," he said. "You won't need to. The silence will be loud enough." I stayed for another hour. We didn't talk much after that. Just sat, drank tea, watched the light shift through the windows. As I got up to leave, he walked me to the porch and said, "You have a right to your anger, Melissa. Don't let anyone shame you for it." I nodded. "I'm just tired of carrying it." He looked at me, calm, proud. "Then set it down, but only when you're ready. Not for them. For you." I got in the car and didn't cry this time. Because for the first time in a long, long while, I wasn't just angry. I was seen. I didn't plan to go back. Not to the house, not to them. But a week after the dinner, an envelope showed up in my mailbox. No return address. But I recognized the writing immediately. My mother's. Thin, slanted script that always looked like it was trying too hard to stay between the lines. Inside was a single sheet of thick stationery, the kind she saved for holidays and people she pretended to like. Melissa, we need to speak. I'd prefer we do this in person. Sunday, 3 p.m. The house, please come. Mom. No apology, no explanation. Just the expectation I would show up. And a part of me, the old part, the conditioned part, wanted to ignore it. Wanted to throw the letter away, pretend it didn't affect me. But I couldn't. Because there was still a part of me, stubborn, unfinished, that needed to look them in the eye and ask the question that had been echoing since the night everything split open. Why didn't you choose me? When Sunday came, I wore jeans, a black sweater, no makeup. I didn't dress to impress or to soften. I dressed like myself. The front door creaked the same way it always had. Mason opened it. He didn't smile. They're in the den, he said, like he was guiding a stranger through a museum of mistakes. Eric sat stiffly on the leather couch, arms crossed, lips a hard line. My father stood near the fireplace as if he were preparing a lecture. My mother was seated in the armchair, perfectly posed, not a hair out of place. Melissa, she said, as if my name tasted bitter. I got your note, I said flatly. Sit. I didn't. I'll stand. A tense pause. Then my father cleared his throat. This has gone too far, he said. Your grandfather spoke the truth, I interrupted. He blinked. You think he's the victim in this? My mother snapped. He humiliated us. No, I said calmly. You did that. He just stopped covering for you. Mason exhaled sharply. Look, I don't know what's going on, but this drama is tearing the family apart. I turned to him. You never saw it, did you? How I was treated differently. You were too busy being toasted and praised and handed things I had to earn 10 times over. That's not fair, Eric muttered. No, I said, stepping closer. How many times did you two get called brilliant? Gifted? Future leaders? And how many times did I hear I was confused, too sensitive, or still figuring things out? Even when I outworked and outranked both of you? No one spoke. I let the silence do its work. You said I was a failure, I said, turning to my father. Right there, in front of everyone. A failure we never wanted. He didn't deny it. He didn't even flinch. I was angry, he said. It was a moment. No, I replied. It was a choice, and it wasn't the first time. My mother stood. You don't understand what it was like back then. We had plans, expectations. For sons, I said. You've been mourning the daughter you never wanted for 28 years. But I'm not mourning anymore. I'm done. Another silence. The heavy kind. The kind that wraps around the throat. I didn't come here for an apology, I added. I came to tell you this. You don't get to rewrite the story now that the truth is out. You don't get to decide who I am anymore. I pulled something from my bag, placed it gently on the table. A copy of the same photo Grandpa gave me. Me, as a baby, in his arms. Smiling. He saw me, I said softly. Even when you didn't. My father looked away. My mother's eyes shimmered, but no tears fell. And then I turned to leave. But before I reached the door, my father spoke again. You were always too emotional, he said coldly. You took everything so personally. I paused, then turned back just once. No, I said. I just finally stopped pretending it didn't hurt. And I left, not angry, not broken, just done. There was no dramatic confrontation, no final shout, no door slammed behind me, just footsteps. Mine. Finally walking away on my own terms. As I drove home, I passed the park near my high school. I pulled over, sat on the bench where I used to read during lunch while the others played and laughed and belonged. And I realized something. I didn't need to belong to them anymore. I belonged to myself now. And that was more than enough. It's been 3 months since the dinner. 3 months since I stood in that den, told my truth, and walked out of a house I'd spent most of my life trying to belong in. And I haven't gone back. Not out of anger, out of clarity. I always thought walking away would feel like a defeat, like giving up, like I'd failed to fix something broken. But instead, it felt like air. Like standing at the top of a staircase I'd been climbing in the dark and finally realizing, I don't need to carry this anymore. I didn't tell many people what happened. Not at first. Just my closest friend, Naomi. She cried before I did. And then she asked the one question I hadn't let myself consider. So, what now? What now? At first, I didn't know. I went through the motions, work, errands, sleep, but everything felt different. Like the lens I used to see the world had been wiped clean, and suddenly I could see the outlines of my own life again. And for once, I didn't see failure. I saw survival, growth, proof. So I made a decision. I took 2 weeks off work, not for a vacation, but for something more radical, something I'd been afraid of my entire adult life. Stillness. I stayed in a small cabin upstate with no Wi-Fi and barely any signal. Just books, a journal, and the sound of birds in the morning. It was terrifying at first. All that silence, all those thoughts. But then, something began to shift. Each morning, I wrote a letter to myself. Not the version of me that chased approval or shrank to make others comfortable, but the girl who held on through it all. The girl who built a life out of rejection. The woman who learned how to name herself. Some days the letters were messy, angry, full of questions. Other days they were soft, forgiving. But every word was honest. By the end of the first week, I knew I was never going back to who I had been. And on the last night, I sat by the fireplace with a blanket around my shoulders, opened my journal, and wrote, "You are not a placeholder in someone else's story. You are not a mistake. You are not broken. You are the author now." When I returned to the city, I felt like I had skin again. The day I got back, a letter was waiting in my mailbox. No return address. Just my name on the front. Melissa, in my father's handwriting. Inside was a single page. I don't know what to say. I keep trying to find the right words, but they never come. You're right. I was cruel, and wrong, and afraid. I thought keeping distance would protect me from disappointment. But it only built walls I couldn't climb back over. I don't expect forgiveness. But I hope someday when you look back, you'll see that I knew. I knew I failed. And I regret it more than you'll ever know. No signature. Just the truth. Written in the same block letters he used on every birthday card that used to say so little. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't matter, but because I didn't need it anymore. I folded the letter and placed it in the same drawer as the photo Grandpa gave me. The one of him holding me as a baby, smiling like I was the best thing that had ever happened to him. That drawer used to be full of pain. Now it's full of proof. Proof that healing doesn't always come from others. Sometimes it comes when you stop waiting for them and choose yourself instead.